I want to start by saying my thanks to you, to the Buck Institute. I asked Bob, how long has Buck Institute of Education been going? This is the 30th year anniversary, which I imagine you all know. But if you go back to the world in 1987, that was a world of fax machines, of personal computers that were big clunky things where you did Excel spreadsheets or word processing. Everything is different today. So if project-based learning was a really good idea 30 years ago, today it's indispensable. And so I've been grateful to their work for years. When they asked me to come, I said, I will be here no matter what. If you want me to take tickets to the door or serve coffee, I'll come, because it's just such an amazing group. And to Ken Kay, I don't know if you've spent much time on EdLeader 21's, on the website with their work. If you haven't checked out www.profileofagrad.org, it gives any school community the tools to help start to define their own essential skills for their graduates. Really important work. But today I really want to talk about what you're doing, because you are the heroes of American education. And the stakes on what you're doing could not be higher. And understanding that, and part of what you have to understand, will not be good news. So I always apologize, particularly at 8 a.m., for being a downer. But I have to start with the downer part, okay? Because as Ken said, maybe 6, 7 years ago, I started to focus on a couple issues that to me are the defining issues of our age. And the first came from my time in venture capital, and that is the relentless acceleration of machine intelligence. And this is not a small issue. This is an enormous issue. And the reason it's enormous is because of this little thing that we all probably studied somewhere in high school math that we never use and never understand, which is exponential growth. So you've all seen exponential functions, right? You probably, if you're a math teacher, you may have taught those to your students. But making those real is what's hard, because what exponential growth means is that as things move forward, they're not leveling off, they're not steady as they go. They are on this inflection curve that goes up and up and up. What's that mean when it comes to machine intelligence? Okay, in the next decade, the advances in machine intelligence will be 10 times what they were in the past decade. 10 times. If you say you can imagine that, you are wrong. None of us can. If you read a study that says 65% of the jobs will go away, or 47% of this, or 22% of that, they are wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. It is beyond our ability to visualize what will happen. But I want you to think about it in this context. 10 years ago, more or less today, the first smartphone from Apple was introduced. 10 years ago. Think of all the massive disruption in our economy and society, in citizenship demands as a result of cell phones, smartphones, Facebook, social media. They have changed everything about our world in just 10 years. Now I want you to say, imagine 10 times that amount of disruption. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for our kids? And so I'm going to make it very tangible. I had a discussion about a little over a year ago, had breakfast with several of the top technology officers from name brand companies, Apple, Google, Amazon, whatever. And I said, this is what I said to audiences: am I being too alarmist? And we were it was at the TED event where they do all the TED Talks. We were at this 65-story building, the Fairmont, in downtown Vancouver, British Columbia. I mean, beautiful hotel. And one of the CTOs said, well, it may not be quite 10 years, but certainly between 10 and 20 years, buildings like this will be entirely 3D printed. Somebody else said, we had a great breakfast. I don't know if it's 5 years or 10 years, but sometime in that time period, most of the food we eat will never touch human hands, from Genesis to our fork, our knife, our spoon, or our mouth. Somebody else, you'll guess the company, said, when the team came to us and said, we want a budget for this thing that seemed like science fiction, driverless cars, the most optimistic person in that team who requested funding, who put their career on the line, who said, I will bet my reputation on being able to make driverless cars real, the most optimistic person said, it will take at least 20 years. 5 years later, driverless cars were 3 times safer than people-driven cars. To get a sense of how that affects the economy, 6 million people in America make their living driving people or goods in a car or a truck. Those jobs are on their way out. So we think of that and we say, oh my gosh, this is an issue. But we often think about this in the context of moving boxes on a factory floor, or driving a long-haul truck, or jobs that are demanding and important jobs. I interviewed somebody 2 months ago who is fighting an incredibly aggressive, difficult to diagnose form of cancer. His daughter is the founder and CEO of a publicly traded biotech company. They are wired. They are able to get him to every top oncologist in the country. So they go to the top oncologists in Boston, New York, and San Francisco who can't figure out what's going on. They don't know what to tell this patient about his cancer. What did they do? They took the entire test results, they sent them to IBM Watson, and had artificial intelligence do the diagnosis. So ask yourself, if world-class oncologists aren't as good as artificial intelligence, what jobs are safe? Okay, and what we need to understand is any job that's routine, any job that relies on low-level pattern recognition, any job that relies on following instructions, any job that relies on recalling content is a job on the way out, okay? And it's happening, and it's happening fast. And as I traveled the country, I went mostly to middle low-income areas, heartland, you name it, and you just see boarded up storefronts and people, it's a tough situation. That's the bad news, and it's bad. Okay, I'm going to double down on the bad news. So stay in the, don't leave because it gets a lot better. But the second piece of bad news is, and this is what really motivated me, is when I started looking at schools, I went from over a 10-year period to trusting, to this is probably fine, to being concerned, to being skeptical, to being alarmed. And what I saw, and it was initially a few schools, and now I've been to a lot of schools. I mean, in one single school year, I went to 200. So, in 5 years, I've probably been to 400 or 500 schools, is that we start with 4 and 5-year-olds who have the exact character traits to do really well in a world of innovation. So just think of any 4 or 5-year-old you know. I don't care what neighborhood, I don't care what the socioeconomics are, I don't care whether it's North Dakota or Upper East Side Manhattan or inner city Newark or whatever. Those 4 and 5-year-olds, what do? They ask a million questions. They're intellectually curious without bounds. They don't worry about failing. They're willing to fail a million times to get somewhere. They think outside of the box. All the things that as a venture guy I wanted to see in the people I funded or hired are what we see in essentially every 4 and 5-year-old. It's there. In school, we don't have to put things into kids they don't have. We have to stop crushing it out of them. Because here's what I see when I get to most high schools. I see kids that follow instructions, that go through the motions, that jump through hoops. What questions do I hear from kids in high school? Mostly, will this be on the test? Think about that. I was chatting with the group from Bismarck. I've been to North Dakota 6 times in the last 2 years. There's some really amazing things going on in North Dakota, inspiring, exciting things. But I want to contrast something. In Fargo, there's a 2nd grade teacher. She gives her kids genius time, she calls it. Just lets her 2nd graders run with whatever they're interested in. And these kids, they don't run, they don't walk, they don't stroll, they sprint. And the one thing she asks is, when a kid goes deep on something, you now have to teach your classmates about it, right? Which you all know, right? We never really learn anything until we teach somebody else something. These kids are on fire with that, and they have a million different things. And what she says, and I heard this all over the country, is if a kid has a reason to learn something, they go at warp speed. Over and over again, adults would tell me, it's funny these days, if a kid gets interested in something, they can become an expert in a matter of days. And I always say, doesn't that have profound implications on the way we organize school? Move up in the grades. In mine at North Dakota, I met with a bunch of teachers, and the teachers in North Dakota, as in any state you're from, and I've been to those states, they're exceptional teachers. I mean, I am the biggest fan of teachers, and it breaks my heart when so many business people don't understand what you're doing, why you entered the profession, and most importantly, don't understand why many of us, business people, legislators, and everything, drive the joy in learning out of the profession. And for that, I totally apologize. But now let's get to mine it. A junior teacher teaches juniors high school English, and he heard about this Genius Hour time. So he goes to his high school juniors and says, I've got great news for you. 1 class period a week, you can work on whatever you want to work on. You know what he told me? He said half of the kids, the way he phrased it was important, is you can work on whatever you're interested in. He said half of his kids did a Google search, what should I be interested in? Okay, and it's very funny, but it isn't. It isn't. Because if kids go through a period where we have these precious 12, 13, 16, 17 years to shape their worldview, to shape their view of themselves, to shape their potential, to shape what they think they can do in the world, and if at the end of the day, they think that what they should do is whatever's put in front of them next, what's going to happen to those kids? What will happen to those kids? And so when I saw those things, I said, this is so profound. And I'll share something. It's a bit embarrassing, but I'm going to share it with you because this underscores what's at stake. 6 years ago or so, I started to share with my friends this. I'd say to them, if our schools don't change profoundly on an urgent basis, if school just kind of runs the same old way, I'm not sure civil society in our country will stay together. And 6 years ago, people kind of went the other way. I mean, think of how you'd react if you're walking down the street and somebody with a beard is holding up a sign saying the end of days are near. That's how even my friends, even my wife probably was looking at me a bit like that. Well, that's what I've said now in probably 150 public forums in the last 2 years. People understand. We are not serving the best long-term interest of our kids with the way we organize this thing called school. And so as I thought about what I could do, and Ken was kind to tee this up, I feel like the people don't change, particularly on something that's entrenched, based on logic. I thought about initially writing a book. I ended up writing one. I'm writing another one. But I don't know that books really change people's mind. Op-eds don't change people's mind. Politicians are not going to change people's mind. You have to get at people emotionally. And you particularly, and I'm saying this on your behalf, have to get to the parents. Because parents are desperately committed to the success of their kids. They want the very best. But parents all too often are risk averse. And so I did a 6-month search. I found a director. He is an amazing director. For those who have seen the film, if you love it, all the credit goes to him. If you hate the film, you can blame me. But we did this film called Most Likely to Succeed. We premiered at Sundance. There's a 1% accept rates at Sundance. It's the best documentary film festival in the world. We did 28 major film festivals in total with the film. And then I did something people will sometimes throw rocks at me for, but I turned down the online guys like Netflix and whatever. I said, no, we want to take this film directly to school communities. And so since it premiered at Sundance a little over 2 years ago, we've done 3,500 community screenings. And every single time it sort of unblocks resistance to change. But for the work you're doing, there's a benefit in seeing, and we really immerse you in a student project and you see what happens. That's an important reason to see the film. I think more importantly, if you see it, you'll understand you need to bring it to your school. You need to show it to your other teachers. You need to show it to your parents. And that's what's happening. We've gotten anybody here from New Jersey? Excellent. So I was, last month I was so even if you've seen the film once, come see it again. I'm going to tell you why. So last month I went to Freehold Township in kind of central New Jersey. And Ross Kaysen was awarded Superintendent of the Year in New Jersey. In the press release, they talk about Most Likely to Succeed. Ross has personally seen the film 20 times. He has shown it to every member of his school board. He's had all of his principals and faculty members watch this film. And he's getting parents to watch it because, and you're going to hear this, I promise, my kids seem to be having fun. Can they really be learning? It's not organized by subject matters. I mean, is that something wrong about what they're doing? They have to actually work with other kids, and sometimes they're not able to succeed as well because another kid drags them down. Well, guess what? That's life. That's the way the adult world works. That's an important thing for kids to learn. But parents need to understand that because you're going to find, I think, parents have reservations. They always do. Sometimes it's the straight A student that has reservations, right? I've gamed the system. I know how to get an A. Now you're telling me to do something different, more ambiguous, more unresolved at the start, more demanding creativity and resourcefulness and perseverance. And the answer is you're better off getting that experience in school than you are in life. One of the people we interviewed, you actually, if you see the film, he's not in it. He ended up on the cutting room floor. But I like to highlight his message because it's so important as Robert Gates. I don't know how many of you know, two-time Secretary of Defense, head of the CIA, military man through and through, but a real educator. And I've gotten to know him through a different context. And we interviewed him, and what he said is, and this is, I expected the military to be the last place to say we need to change school. But shame on me, but I thought Bob Gates would tell me, teach kids how to follow instructions, that's what we're looking for. Absolutely not. Bob Gates says the only generals I've fired are ones who aren't innovative. He calls Iraq and Afghanistan the captain's wars because so many decisions had to be made on the ground without any policy manual. He said, if schools don't teach kids how to be their own advocates, their own agents, to make decisions, to pull together different elements, I don't want them trying to learn that on the battlefield. I want them to learn that in school. And so when you look at that kind of endorsement for the kind of work you're going to be doing, people need to understand that this isn't, one step removed from summer camp or recess or freeze tag. This is actually giving kids the essential skills they need. And so as I traveled, I sort of distilled things down, and I want to go through these and sort of make the link to what's going on in project-based learning. But where I saw great learning experiences, and what surprised me when I went all over the country is they're everywhere. We show in this film one school, but we're very careful to say don't copy them. That's just how they do it. The school itself will say, this works for us, it may not work for you. Kind of run with what works for you, with the passions of your teachers, the interest in emerging passions of your students, the skills you want your kids to develop, but you at least see one. I found great examples everywhere. We was chatting with Bismarck. Bismarck, North Dakota, right? My friends in Palo Alto or Boston or New York, when I say to them, Bismarck, North Dakota can blow you away when it comes to innovation and education, they're like, oh, come on. But Simley Middle School, Bismarck, North Dakota, this is the kind of thing that's possible. Teacher there, Ryan Townsend, asked his kids, we're going to create a project to try to make our world better. They work together, Bismarck has a number, like most places in America today, homeless people. Imagine being homeless in Bismarck, North Dakota in the winter. That is a really, really brutal situation. Many of these homeless people have phones, but they have no way to charge them. So this 8th grade class comes up with the idea of, can we develop solar-powered charging stations so that homeless people have a way to charge their phones? They then say, where can we locate them? There's a park right near the high school. They realize, and it's like STEM, but it's not STEM, because they realize that the surrounding neighbors may have questions and issues about how this is going to work. So they have to go out and interview the neighborhood and understand what their concerns are and make sure they're addressed. And they end up developing this solar-powered charging station. And I go and I meet with these students, and these students, they are students who can't wait to get to school each day. They are students who are learning at warp speed. But most importantly, they are students that understand they can identify problems or opportunities in their community and use their own emerging skills, talents, character traits to make a positive difference in the world. And when I was in that class, I talked to most of the students. There were so many kids who for 7 years in school, had been told how bad you are. And this is one of the biggest tragedies of American education today, is that we tell 1% of the kids you're gifted, and in various forms tell 99% of the kids you're not. And those 99%, what you should really do is drill more on esoteric vocabulary words, or get better at low-level math procedures no adult will ever use, so that you too can climb out of the bottom 99% to break through into the 1% who are gifted. And yet, gifted on what? Gifted on what basis? On a bunch of things that don't really enter into play in the adult world. And so when you look at school and you say, is school's purpose to develop human potential, or is school's purpose to rank it? Most of traditional school today sets out to rank kids' potential on a metric that's not authentic, that's not real, that's not tied to anything important, that's there for the convenience for state legislators and college admissions officers. And when you look at it that way and you say, it actually affords outsized advantage to the affluent to make it even worse. You say, we have to change this. We have to align school with life. And so when you talk to these 8th grade kids in Bismarck, and I could give you raise your hand and say the state, I can give you a great example from your state. There were so many kids that had been told in school they weren't that good, that were superstars in a project. They were good at working with other kids. They were great communicators. They were the kids that generally, in a normal classroom, are viewed as being distracting because they come up with some crazy idea that seems to be out of left field, but it turns out that's the breakthrough for a project. And so when you start to look at that and you say, whoa, this starts to respect a whole range of skills. You know, we were chatting before, I was chatting with a couple of people before, we talked about the tragedy in American education. What's the one innovation we've made in our classrooms? We've done 2 big things in classrooms in mainstream education in America in the last 30 years. We've tested more. We now lead the world in standardized testing. How's that gone? You know, our standardized test scores are flattened down, so that hasn't worked. But we've also eliminated everything practical, everything hands-on. And somehow we live in this universe where we think a kid that's really good at making things isn't as good as a kid at memorizing things. Yet what is the world like? The world wants people who can make things, whether it's making a movie or writing a play or developing a solar-powered charging station or whatever your kids are going to come up with, whatever they're doing. Those are the skills and the capabilities that matter, and those are the things that let many kids shine in very different ways. And back to, and sort of to close the loop on this, with machine intelligence, there is, in fact, a race that's happening right now. Every single kid will be battling against automated solutions going forward. And those automated solutions, as I said, are not going to get slightly better. They're going to get a lot better. And so a real question in education is, do we teach kids how to do things, how to leverage machine intelligence, or do we have them drill on a bunch of low-level things that let even our best students be only slightly worse than a smartphone? And so I want you to really think about the role you're playing, because what I find is once a school community starts to think differently, once you've sort of crossed the line, here's the line, right? Most people don't give school a lot of thought. Most people think school should be kind of the way it was when they went to school. Most people want their kids to do well. Most teachers want their kids to thrive. That's what we all want. But once you sort of cross that line, once you realize that traditional school not only is not helping kids, it's actually impairing their prospects in a world of dynamic innovation, change, rapid shifts every which way from Sunday. Once you realize that's what's going on, you don't go back. What we find with our film, when parents see it, I will get emails all the time from people who say, I can't get it out of my mind. I realize my kids should be doing something different. And so when you're going forward, I don't know if you're one of or a few of or whatever, but in schools, you know, just showing people what can be done in a way that's not in their face. It's not, this is, you know, like everything that used to happen is wrong and this is right, but just say, observe, watch, team teach with me. You know, can we do something pooled together? Because what I hear over and over again is in any given school, it's a lot easier for 10 teachers to be innovative than one. In any given community, it's a lot easier for 10 schools to be innovative than one. And we're at that point. The thing that gave me, you know, so despite being alarmed about the pace of advance of machine intelligence, despite real concerns I have that most kids are in schools that are not helping them, I'm very optimistic about where we are in the world. And the reason is it's you. It's these people willing to step up and say, we can do so much better. Because these differences are not, you know, we're not playing a small ball game here. We're not saying our goal is to eke out a 3% gain in standardized test scores on measures that don't relate to anything of consequence in life. We're not saying we're going to try to take a bad model and make it slightly better. We're saying we can reinvent, reimagine education, and we're going to do it in our existing schools. We're going to do it with our existing kids. And when that happens, and whatever the project, you know, at the beginning we were talking about some of the projects may not be great at first. Many aren't. You know, I mean, I go to these things and, you know, people will put up exhibitions and you look and some aren't good and some are okay and some are great. But the amount of learning, even in a bad project, is enormous. And it's that sense of understanding that the ultimate goal we all have in life is to produce, to make, to create things, to shape other people, to influence and inspire. These are the things that matter. This is why we're put on this planet. And so the question is, how do we do that? How do we accomplish that in school? And when you look at it, we often sort of have this assumption, right? If we put kids through 12 years, 13 years, 16, 17 years of school, where the constant message they get is outcompete your classmates, excel in something you don't care about, where we can't tell you why it's relevant later in life. If all we say to them is, do the game of school better and jump through hoops, why do we think when we give them a graduation diploma that they're suddenly going to be focused on making their world better? We need to build that into the school process. And so as you take this forward, I want you to understand that small steps lead to big things. So if you're here and you're the first teacher in your school to try this, recruit allies. Show people what's happening with your students. Because if you can go from 1 teacher to 5 teachers to 10 teachers, it becomes contagious. And we don't need every teacher to do this, right? I think one of the big mistakes that happens is when somebody comes along and says, everybody's got to do something different. That's not the way change happens. The way change happens is when we give teachers permission to innovate and create. I say to legislators all the time, our teaching force is way more innovative than we give them credit for. If we put them in No Child Left Behind handcuffed for 20 years, and we can't criticize them for not being innovative. Give them permission to innovate. In North Dakota, the state legislature in March passed, and Doug Burgum, the new governor, signed into law an Innovation Education Act. If legislators in North Dakota get we need to change schools, there's a lot of company out there. And so recruit allies, push your agenda forward. But know this, right? Know this, that if your school can change, it's contagious, right? You're fighting hard for your students, but you're fighting hard for all the students in your school, and you're fighting hard for all the students in your community. Because if we get this right, you know, the thing that's great about a world of innovation, there's no upper limit to the number of jobs. There's no upper limit to the number of career paths our kids can define and create to make the world better. We just need to equip them with the skills and the confidence and the mindset that says, the world is there for you. There are enormous resources at your disposal to make you even more effective and productive, but we need to help you shape your path forward. And so I'll close. Newark, New Jersey, I gave a big screening to Eastside High School, one of the tough inner city schools. And this wispy little kid named Oscar came up to me afterward, after seeing the film. And he said to me something I hear a lot from people, is when he saw kids working on a project, he said to me, I now know I can make my world better. I don't do well in academics, but I can communicate with people. I'm a good leader. I think I can make things happen. But what Oscar said to me was this, and I'm going to leave you on this note. He said, you know, he called me Mr. Dintersmith. Most people call me Ted. He said, you know, we read about this thing in our history books about how way, way back, adults in America came together to put somebody on the moon. Like when he started to say way, way back, I thought it was going to be the Greeks and the Romans or something. But it's like, hey, Oscar, Oscar, I was a grown-up when that happened. That's not that far back. But he said, do you think adults in our country could come together to make our schools great? And we owe it to them, right? These 10-year-olds trust us to make great decisions. You guys are voting with your feet. You're here. You're doing the great work that needs to be done. You know, anything I could do to help, I mean, people from Bismarck will tell you, I am all in on this because I do believe nothing less than the future of civil society in our country hinges on the important work you, Buck, and this combined community that's aligning school with life is doing. So I'm deeply grateful for the chance to talk to you. I'm cheerleading everything you do. Hope you can come to the film, and I'm just heartfelt gratitude for all your efforts. Thank you.